Hello, and welcome back to Book and Page, where we are working on Chapter 6 of The Place of the Lion. Oh boy, as you could tell from the title of this video, I am not a fan of Anthony, but I think that's because we're placing him as a character in a certain time period. Let's get on with the summary. So, we ended Chapter 5 with the lion having approached Anthony and Quentin going nuts and disappearing, and Anthony ending up by himself. So we picked that up very close to where we started for Chapter 6. Anthony basically makes his way home by himself, having no idea where the lion's gone, where Quentin has gone, what he just experienced, and also he can't stop thinking about Damaris. We'll get to that, don't worry. From there, he takes care of his basic needs, and then he goes out and sits down outside his apartment. There's some tennis happening. He's having a smoke, and he starts to think about what is happening, and in the process, figure out what he's going to do about it. So, in this process, he asks himself 6 questions. 1. Had it happened? 2. Why had it happened? 3. What is likely to happen now? 4. How was it likely to affect Damaris? 5. What had happened to Quentin? 6. What did he himself propose to do about it at all? So these are the questions he asks, though he does dismiss the first question fairly quickly, because between his experience and the experience of other people, he's figured out something's happening, so asking whether or not it had happened actually kind of useless. So the rest of his meditations in this chapter are things like in theory, what's happening? Has this happened before? He can't stop thinking about Aaron's snake, the biblical encounter between Moses and the king of Egypt, where the king of Egypt's magician summoned snakes from staffs. Moses takes his brother Aaron's staff, throws it on the ground, it becomes a snake, and eats the other 2 snakes. So Anthony ends up wondering, was this a precursor? Were all of the curses in Egypt actually this event happening prior to this point, and that was somehow stopped, and it's now starting again? He continues to be an asshole about Damaris. He's very worried that she's too childish, and actual written words here, half-educated girl, to be able to handle all of this, so obviously he needs to take charge. His plan is to try and move her to London, though with the recognition that if this keeps expanding and expanding, London will eventually be overtaken. And then after he moves Damaris to London, he's like, I should probably find Quentin, you know, my friend, who's running mad through the woods right now, or possibly dead, who I convinced to come out and investigate with me. But Damaris is first and foremost. Yeah, that's basically the chapter. It is the meditation of Mr. Anthony Durrant. Let's talk about his hypocrisy. There's a lot of it. A lot of it has to do with Damaris. What's really frustrating is I find the first part of this chapter, and it's not a particularly long chapter, it is very short, and again, very philosophical at points. I find the first half very interesting, because I like the steps that he's going through. Like, this is a really smart way of handling this, where he's keeping himself calm, he's asking himself questions, and he's allowing for, again, I'm going to quote Spock here, once you eliminate the impossible, what remains, however improbable, must be the truth. So he is recognizing if only he had experienced all of this, then maybe it's not happening. But he's not the only one to experience it. He's experienced it with Quentin. He's experienced it with Mr. Ty. Damaris has had experiences. The woman that saw the snake had experiences. Mr. Foster, while he hasn't directly seen anything, is relatively sure something's going on. Mr. Barringer is unconscious. Mr. Ty is so affected by what he saw, he stopped doing the one passion he really honestly seemed to have had. Like, Anthony is looking at all of this and going, okay, from the evidence I've had of all these experiences, something is in fact happening. He then goes on to the second question, which is, why is it happening? And he fully admits he himself doesn't have a hypothesis here. He's working off Mr. Foster's hypothesis, though he does have some questions about the concepts here and Mr. Foster's understanding of it. For example, is Quentin actually being hunted here? And how then are these two worlds meeting? Is it, in fact, the images that have to meet first? And like I said, absolutely fascinating discussion about, is the crowned snake not visual because he hasn't run into another actual snake? The lion became visible the moment he collided with the lioness, but snakes are a lot rarer. The butterfly, well, do we remember seeing butterflies in the garden before the big butterfly disappeared? The big butterfly appeared and the rest disappeared, because we're told originally that both Mr. Ty and Anthony saw the large butterfly before all the other ones started flocking towards them. But maybe there was a singular one there. So perhaps the snake has entered the world and just isn't visible yet to most people because, well, it hasn't collided with another snake. It does also get Anthony wondering what catalyst has to be involved, and is it just men? Well, he says it can't be because this woman has seen the crowned snake and is the only one to have seen the crowned snake so far. But maybe he saw the invisible snake from the movement along the ground. He's thinking perhaps that was very snake-like now that he has time to think about it. And I'm really fascinated with the discussion of whether the Egyptian plagues, there's the word, the plagues on Egypt are a result of these two worlds meeting. For those of you who don't know the biblical story, Moses was Jewish, and there was a lot of Jewish slavery in Egypt. This is hard to explain because it's been a while and I don't know all the details. But basically, the Pharaoh decides to kill all of the young Egyptian boys. I can't remember if there's a prophecy or what, but there is a slaying of the innocents. And so to save Moses, his mother puts him in a basket, floats him down the Nile, and he's picked up by the... It's an Egyptian woman. I just can't remember if it's actually the wife of the Pharaoh or not. I could just be thinking about the Disney movie at this point. But basically, an Egyptian woman picks up Moses, and he ends up growing up as an Egyptian until it is revealed that he has been lied to for most of his life. He's not Egyptian, he's Hebrew, and his people are enslaved. There's a burning bush. Through the burning bush, the voice of God tells Moses to go and free his people, and Moses goes and challenges the Pharaoh for the release of all the Hebrews, all the Jewish slaves. Pharaoh says no. This seems to be then when Aaron's snake happens, the staff turning into the snake and swallowing the other two, and from there a series of plagues are released into Egypt. The Nile ends up running like blood. Locusts come in, eat everything. There's a pox plague on all the animals. And then the final one, again, the voice of God speaks to Moses and tells him that every family who believes in God is to kill a lamb as sacrifice and to spread its blood on their door frames. Because the Spirit of God the spirit of death. So the wrathful God, keeping in mind this is Old Testament, will descend on Egypt that night and enter any home that has not had the sacrificial blood placed on it and kill the firstborn son. And so Anthony is wondering, are we seeing something like this happening a second time around? And we're just understanding it more in an intellectual way and less so in the purely biblical way that Moses would have perceived and Egypt would have perceived these plagues. Absolutely fascinating discussion. It would be really cool to dig into that more, except Anthony throws it out the window because he is so obsessed with Damaris at this point in time that she's got to be the focus. And this is why I bring up the hypocrisy, because Anthony is frustrating beyond belief. Because Damaris talks about the similarities between Plato and biblical figures such as angels, and, well, she's just being self-obsessed and caught up in dead philosophies. Anthony thinks about these similarities in the context of what is happening, and he has figured it all out, and he is the one to do anything about it. Like, this is where my frustration is especially stemming from, purely because I've run into academics like this, where they've got it figured out, right? They have figured out the truth, and everybody else, even who are also academics, are just ignorant of the truth, and oftentimes willfully ignorant of the truth. They're focusing on the wrong philosophers, or they're comparing the wrong topics, or they care too much about certain things and not enough about other things. And it's just like, that's the point of academia, is to look at concepts on so many different scales. Like, that's why I want to be a student for the rest of my life, because I love learning about these different ideas from these different perspectives. Sure, I'll read about something and I'll be like, I think this person has it. But more often than not, I'll read about somebody else and I'll be like, or do they have it? I am very confused. And that's okay. It is also okay to take a consideration of Platonic forms and compare them to angels. Just as it's perfectly fine to take the Platonic form showing up in your world and compare it to the Egyptian plagues because you're trying to understand something. I've mentioned in previous videos that these ideas, these forms, are very hard to explain because we're trying to use human concepts to refer to something far greater than humanity. Whether or not that's Platonic forms, the perfect ideals of all of these ideas, or God, that works too. Whether you're taking the secular or religious, it doesn't matter. It is very hard for us to put words to it, to explain what we're experiencing, because it's meant to be otherworldly and above us and beyond us. But that's the point of academia, is to try and put it to words, to try and understand concepts, to try comparing things to get a better sense of how the world works. So Anthony sitting here and several times insulting Damaris as he himself is doing something very similar is frustrating beyond belief. And I mean, like, insulting Damaris. Like, "Oh, Damaris, darling," he exclaimed, and felt himself in all a terrible fear for her. If that childish ignorance and concern and childish arrogance and selfishness met those dangers, oh, then what shelter and safety would there be? To go on, he wanted to help her. He wanted to stay this movement till she understood and turned to meet it, because he's got it figured out, right? And If his mind clamored again for the desire that they should do this together, and together find the right way into or out of this other world, if so far his own self thrust into his otherwise selfless anxiety, it was in a momentary accompaniment. See, he's not being selfish. Damaris is very selfish, but Anthony is being selfless. He wants to save her. He wants to save her because he likes her. And he wants to have dominion over her. He goes on to say that at the end of the chapter. Because if Anthony was truly selfless here, this concern would be for everybody. Like, notably, Quentin seems to be in more danger at this point in time. We know where Damaris is. Quentin's gone missing after having been confronted by an absolutely gigantic lion. But Quentin comes second. But Anthony's being selfless here. No, he's not. He's being just as childishly selfish as Damaris. Because he's got this idea that he knows what's best for her. And that he should be the one in charge. Because he's selfless and knows what's best for her. Again, going on to say, but she wouldn't. She would go on thoughtfully playing with the dead pictures of ideas, with names and philosophies, Plato and Pythagoras, and Anselm and Abelard, Athens and Alexandria and Paris, not knowing that the living existence of what seers and saints had looked were already in the movement to avenge themselves on her. Again, he is doing very similar thought experiments. He's just saying that he's recognized what's happening in the world, so it's okay for him to be doing it this way. Also, again, his world revolves around so much around Damaris that he has now just said that they're out for her alone. She is so selfish and arrogant and childish that these two worlds have collided directly to punish and destroy her. And he has to be the savior in this moment to turn all of this back and to save Damaris, his true love, even though she's infuriating and needs to change the way he wants her to change. Do you see the problem? Like, this chapter starts out fantastically and then devolves into, ultimately, some people will say human desire, but there is a very specific type of desire here, and that is very the macho, machismo, like, patriarchal, man in charge of everything type thing. And is Williams done taking pot shots? No. Later we have her called, was he really proposing to govern the principles of creation, to attempt to turn back for the safety of one half-educated woman's personal safety, the movement of the vast originals of life? Again, man's selfish. He likes this one girl. She's half-educated, but he likes her. So he is the fully educated, manly man of manliness, gonna stop all this from happening. And again, you can see an argument being made against society that's allowed Damaris to get this uppity. And I don't mean just in subtext. It wasn't her fault. It was the fault of her time, her culture, her education, the pseudo-knowledge that affected all the learned, the pseudo-skepticism that infected all the unlearned. In an age of pretense, she was only pretending as everyone else did in their lost and imbecile century. Hey, Anthony. Know who else is a product of their time, their culture, and their education? The pseudo-knowledge and pseudo-skepticism in the age of pretense? In this lost and imbecilic century, you are. It is absolutely fascinating to read a text written by a prior generation that harps so much on how the women have gotten uppity and society allows them to get uppity. Again, it's trying to be subtle here. It's not very subtle. You're not seeing this argument made about Quentin, who's gone nuts and gone screaming off into the forest. Nah. He's just someone being affected by these events. Mr. Ty and his fascination with butterflies? No, that's not judged in these standards at all. It's Damaris, whose sole focus for Anthony is the fact that she is a woman. He might try and act like it's everything else. Anthony sighed a little and stood up. Adam, he said. Adam. Well, I am as much a child of Adam as any. The red earth is a little pale, perhaps. Let's go and walk in the garden among the beasts of the field, which the Lord God hath made. I feel a trifle microcosmic, but if the proportion is in me, let these others know it. Let me take the dominion over them. I wish I had any prospect of exercising dominion over Damaris. Get out. This is oftentimes the root of Western patriarchy, is going back to the very start of the Old Testament, to the creation of all things, including humanity, when dominion is given to humans over the birds of the air and the beasts of the ground and the fish of the sea. Did you know this story is actually told twice in the Bible? Very close together. Genesis 1 tells the full creation story, starting at the first day and ending on the seventh day when God rested. This includes the creation of humanity. 2 of humanity. In fact, a male and a female. Genesis 1 doesn't differentiate Adam and Eve, nor does it state that Eve was created out of Adam. They seem to be created together in the image of God. Genesis 2 then goes on to tell of Adam arriving alone, naming the animals, being upset he doesn't have a partner of his equal, and then God making Eve out of Adam's rib. These are 2 different stories. But oftentimes, the word choice used in Genesis 1, that is, dominion over the beasts of the world, is used in reference also to Eve. But those 2 stories aren't put together. We are not told that Adam named all the animals, Eve was created out of Adam's rib, and then God gave Adam dominion over all the beasts of the world. We're told in Genesis 1 that he created Adam and Eve, sorry, they're not even named, male and female of humanity, and then God speaks to humanity and gives them dominion. So, does dominion apply to other humans? It depends on what you want to argue. Like I said, most of Western patriarchy has argued that due to the second story happening, that dominion Adam is given is purely to Adam alone and applies to Eve as well. Do I believe it? No. Do I understand why people think that? Yes. Do I hate it? Certainly. Thank you. And it kind of gets worse, because there is a very big difference between Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve after they fall and are turned out of the garden. But most people don't recognize that there's a difference. There's also perhaps a change in wording. When we say dominion, that sounds like we should be able to do whatever we want. There are certain types of leaders that see this. Tyrants, mostly. But the other wording we could use here is stewardship, which is to say that while you do have power here, it is for the good of everything you have power over. You are taking care of the earth, the beasts, the birds, the fish, and your fellow humans as well. Now, this is not the word used in most biblical translations. Certainly the James Bible, the King James being one of the most well-known, uses dominion. But there's that question of being turned out of the garden. Did Adam and Eve have dominion over the earth while they were good and still in the garden? Because ultimately when they're turned out, God punishes them and says they must now work for what they need. They have to plow the fields. And ultimately we end up also eating some animals. There is an argument in the Bible that says we weren't supposed to originally, but there is a possibility that our dominion, whether or not that was power, ultimately was lost the moment we were turned out of the garden, and we simply became stewards because of the knowledge that we had, rather than any divinely given power, because we screwed up. Williams and Anthony here, though, are going to differentiate. Eve screwed up. Adam just went along with it, probably so that he could stay together with Eve. Another patriarchal idea that says women are the center of all things that are evil. Anthony saying these forms have come in just to destroy and punish Damaris, and Adam is the self-sacrificing person who's there to take care of Eve after she makes mistakes. Hey, Anthony compares himself directly to Adam. Altogether, we end up having a chapter that combines a lot of religious context and philosophical context, and a lot of hypocrisy on Anthony's part, who complains when Damaris does this stuff, but he's perfectly fine in doing it. Because he's a manly man of manliness who's realized the truth of the world, and he's got to protect the innocent child, Damaris, even if she's fighting him, until she wakes up and realizes he was right and should be in control. Oh, are you saying that's not what's happening? Pretty sure that's what's happening. Keeping in mind, of course, that this was written in a time period where the patriarchy was still a lot more control than it currently is. It's still concerning, because you'll notice Anthony rarely changes through the rest of the story. See, he's already undergone his trial and passed it. The lion approached him and he withstood and didn't run away or disappear. Damaris is going to have a massive personality change. Because patriarchy. Thanks. I hate it. I'm going to keep reading, and I hope you do too. See you next time.